Veteran war correspondent, an American war correspondent who is currently residing in Kyiv, Ukraine, and reporting for us and other media sources on the war there. He also has a video blog over on YouTube. His name is spelled Philip with one L and one P, P-H-I-L-I-P, and Ittner, I-T-T-N-E-R. So if you plug that in over on YouTube, you will find his video blog, and you can follow him. It's also his Twitter handle is Philip Ittner. Phil, welcome back to the program. How are you?
I'm fine, Tom. I'm back in the capital, so we've had a bad turn of weather, but generally just fine.
Good, good. I'm curious. There's been some reporting in the United States about how successful Putin has been getting Republican politicians to embrace him since he started trash talking trans people and gay people and talking about Christianity and how he's the man that God loves and he loves Jesus and all this kind of stuff. And I'm wondering how this is viewed from Kyiv. Ron DeSantis, for example, just came out and said, "Oh, this is just a regional conflict."
Yeah, well, statements like that are not welcome here in Ukraine, particularly. But that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. But you're absolutely right. There is a certain aspect of what Putin and his like-minded colleagues in Russia put forward with their version of Christian nationalism that resonates with some folks in the States. In many ways, it's a cynical thing that Putin does with religion because he does actually use the church as a way to maintain his control over his population. We see just today, Tom, or the last couple of days and then culminating in today, there's been this argument that's happening over an incredibly important religious site within Orthodox Christianity, the Lavra, here in Kiev. It's a monastery and a series of cave dwellings where they inter saints and people of high significance in the religious church, in the Orthodox Church, and they're getting kicked out. They're getting kicked out by Ukrainian forces because there's a section of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church which is beholden to the head of the church in Moscow, who is, by the way, a former KGB agent.
Oh, God.
So all of this kind of stuff, when it comes to Christianity, when it comes to nationalism, when it comes to the rhetoric that we hear about the anti-LGBTQ or trans or whatever it is, a lot of it is very cynical. You have to recognize that because the most important thing to Vladimir Putin and his ilk is power and maintaining power. You can see it in a number of different things that they have done over the years where it's very disingenuous. It is a means to an end. And that end is maintaining control over the population in Russia, whether it's through the church or any other kind of like culture war issue. And then it's also used cynically internationally to kind of get fellow travelers and to undermine solidarity within the West, because, there are those, as we well know in the United States, who are sympathetic to that worldview, that religious Christian nationalism, and Putin is speaking to it, but it isn't really out of honest faith. It's done to maintain control and as a weapon.
Right, yeah. We've been seeing that same thing, by the way, from Republican politicians, by and large Republican. I mean, there's a few Democrats who play that game too, but, I'm more sanctimonious than you are. I'm the true Christian, you're not, all this kind of stuff. And
it goes back. Yeah, it goes back deep into everybody's history, frankly.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So, Phil, in the last week, we've seen, actually in the last couple of days, we've seen two, I think, really consequential things happen. One was this Black Sea drone incident. I'm assuming this is the U.S. drone. This is coming up over the Black Sea south of Ukraine, and this is a territory, an area that the Russians very much want to seize control of. And then also Poland has just announced that they're going to send 5 or 6 MiG fighters to Ukraine, which seems like it could be a big deal. You know, but I don't know. You're the war correspondent. You want to tell us your thoughts on these two events?
Well, sending fighter jets is a pretty significant step, and the Poles have been very forward in their decisions to supply Ukraine with weaponry. But this is a big deal, sending fighter jets, because you know, oddly enough, the Russians do not have air superiority. That's something when NATO forces, American forces, go into a war, the very first thing you do is take control of the skies, because once you have dominance over the skies, you really can affect things on the ground. And for one reason or another, the Russians have not been able, even now over a year into this conflict, to maintain air superiority. Oddly enough, when I was driving back from Kharkiv on this trip that I took out into the Donbass, I saw a Ukrainian fixed-wing fighter jet flying openly in the air. And I mean, that's just, it's unthinkable to a NATO commander that would be allowed. So for Poland to be sending more fighter jets right as it is expected that there will be some sort of Ukrainian offensive, that's a big thing, and they're crossing a threshold. We'll have to see whether or not other NATO member states follow suit. But the Ukrainians have been asking for multi-use fighter jets that can attack both the ground and then also maintain supremacy in the skies for quite some time. And the Poles making this decision, like the tanks, that decision, it might cross a Rubicon, and then other people start to supply fighter jets. Now, as to the drone situation, the drone was apparently flying in an airspace that was internationally is recognized as international air. I mean, that they were not inside anybody's border. But the Russians claim that they have a zone around Crimea that they claim is restricted because of their ongoing quote-unquote special operations. Nobody else recognizes that. Right. So, you know, it's this thing of, well, you know, just because you say you have dominance in that area doesn't necessarily mean it's true. But this kind of stuff happens so often. To me, it's not exactly a momentous occasion, because, you know, we've all heard of stories of submarines, Russian submarines and Western submarines kind of tailing one another through the waters, and oftentimes they'll collide. Some suspect that's what caused the downing of the Kursk back in Putin's early days of his presidency. Right. But you know, the fact that these Russian aircraft clearly were harassing the drone. Now, you could say harassing. I mean, they were buzzing this thing. They weren't just playing around. They were coming very close to the thing. Had it been a manned aircraft, obviously none of this would have happened. But they intercepted this thing. The video has been released just today. You can see the fuel that's being released from the fighter jet onto this Reaper drone, which then eventually caused it or the Pentagon says they then decided to bring it down into deep water so it couldn't be retrieved. The Russians have today announced that they have ships in the region and they're going to try and recover it. How significant that will be, we don't know, because, you know, how damaged will it be? How deep is it? You know, what will they be able to recover? But the downing of the drone, I don't think is a major event, but it could be used as a pretext by the West and by the United States to say, well, if you're going to play that game, then we're going to start providing more anti-aircraft weapon systems, or we're going to start giving F-16s or what have you. But, you know, just it isn't ratcheting down. It's not necessarily an escalation, I don't think, but both sides are kind of maneuvering around this thing, and we can all just hope that it doesn't, nobody loses control. Yeah. So heretofore, it's the Ukrainians fighting this thing, and that is far preferable for a direct confrontation between Russia and the West. So
yeah. No, I'm with you on that. Phil, yeah. we're running out of time here, but you know, you mentioned the spring offensive. What are you expecting? What are the Ukrainians expecting? You know, we're hearing both the Ukrainians are going to try to recover territory, and that the Russians are going to try to seize more of Ukraine. How do you think this is going to play out?
Well, the Russians are going to try and solidify their gains in the Donbass, which is really what they want to do because they want to get, ultimately, in many ways, this is all about Sevastopol, where a quarter of Russia's navy is located. So they have to have a land bridge, and that's why they really want to control Donbass. Cynically, I don't think they really care about citizens of Donbass. They really want that land bridge.
Yeah.
As for the Ukrainians have, by sheer luck, they have a number of people in positions of leadership. We talk a lot about Zelensky, but the guy in charge of Ukraine's armed forces, General Zaluzhny, is a really very cunning and talented military commander. And as we saw in the previous counteroffensive, when everybody thought they'd go for a town called Kherson in the southern part of Ukraine, in the end they received territory up in the north, a town called Kharkiv. It was an amazing feint and a lot of trickery and estimations of where they would go, and then they didn't go there, they went somewhere else. He's a very cunning general. So we'll have to wait and see what he does, but the Ukrainians are not just going to sit on their hands. I expect that in about a month's time, give or take, and I wouldn't want to put money on it, but there will be a counteroffensive by the Ukrainians, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, there you go. Phil Ittner, you can follow his regular posts over on YouTube, on his video blog, and his Twitter handle, Philip Ittner. Phil, thanks so much for dropping by.